So I guess talking of things that are back for one last time anyway.
Backstreet Boys?
That's right.
Would you like me to talk about...
Completely derailed my train of thought.
Would you like me to talk about James Bond, Drew?
I would indeed like to hear about the continuing adventures of wee Jimmy Bond.
Aye, the continuing adventures of wee Jimmy Bond. If Daniel Craig has faced a particularly truculent enemy during his tenure as James Bond, it certainly isn't Spectre. After 5 movies, I'm not entirely sure who Spectre even are, or what it is they're actually aiming to achieve beyond trolling Britain's foremost fictional secret agent. No, if he's been the victim of anything, then Craig, arguably the best Bond, I think we can all probably agree, has suffered the wildest fluctuations in movie quality of any of his peers. If you plot the relative qualities of these particular entries on a graph, you basically get a saw wave. And if you're following my logic here, you've probably come to the conclusion that No Time to Die, Danny's swan song as 007, is a, inverted commas, good Bond movie for relative values of good, and in a lot of senses it is. But it also isn't. At 2 3/4 hours, you might imagine No Time to Die would be a bloated affair, but if we take a step back and consider the absolute mess of plot contrivances that director Kerry Yoji Fukunaga has the unenviable task of wrapping up, it's perhaps understandable he'd want to give himself a bit of wiggle room. The plotting of No Time to Die isn't all that complicated on paper, but one of my chief gripes is that the script, courtesy chiefly of this generation's stalwarts Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, with a much vaunted pass from Phoebe Waller-Bridge, makes a pretty good fist of making it feel an awful lot more labyrinthine than it actually is. For the first time in my life, I've had to field a WhatsApp message from my mother asking for clarification of a Bond plot, something I was able to do in a short paragraph, yet Fukunaga et al. Seemed to struggle to squeeze into 2.5 hours plus change. For what it's worth, which isn't much, Rami Malek's horrendously underutilised antagonist Safin has designs on unleashing a DNA-coded virus enabled by a kidnapped scientist whose disappearance is perturbing enough to our old CIA friend Felix Leiter that he rouses Bond from 5 years of retirement. Safin wants to use his technology to kill millions for insert reason here, but first demonstrates its utility by turning it on his villainous comrades at Spectre, wiping out the entire organisation, including Blofeld, at a stroke. As if this shit isn't enough to be getting on with, it's all tied into Bond's relationship with Madeleine, played again by Léa Seydoux, with the pair's relationship since the last movie somewhat soured by a resurgent Spectre, framing her for their actions in this entry's opening scenes, set 5 years prior. For the most part, No Time to Die doesn't feel its length, which is probably an indication that I had a good time watching it. And I did have a good time watching it, at least maybe 2/3 of its running time, and I have enough goodwill for Bond in reserve, I suppose, that I'll take a slightly saggy back 9 if the payoff is worth it. Which, well, I almost can't believe I'm saying this, but I don't think it is. Fukunaga does a pretty good job of assembling the flat pack mess he's inherited, and I kind of expected he would, given prior form, including the first season of True Detective, which remains, in my humble opinion, an absolute high point of TV history. However, I can't help but wonder what Fukunaga could have come up with if he was allowed to develop his own Bond story from a blank slate, because, ladies and gentlemen, if No Time to Die has one ace up its sleeve, it's that it leaves us with one very blank slate. Technically, the film exhibits all of the precision-machined competence one would expect to buy for such a budget, with great cinematography, sound design, scoring, and, probably, catering. While the villains are dealt a pretty lacklustre hand in terms of character development, there's enough time spent with Bond and Madeleine that I suppose I ought to have cared more about them. But I didn't. I suppose, too, I ought to have been excited at the introduction of interesting new characters such as Paloma and Nomi. But I wasn't. The death of a significant series favourite, 2/3 of the way in? And of the movie's final minutes, which seem to have been crafted solely with the aim of reducing me to a blubbering wreck, well, I wasn't. And I honestly can't believe I wasn't, and that's how I know there's something wrong here. To be clear, No Time to Die is a pretty good Bond movie, comfortably in third place among Craig's entries behind Casino Royale and Skyfall, in which order of preference you may have for those two. The problem might not even be with James. Maybe after the last 18 months, I've just changed too much. It isn't you, Danny. It's me. Anyway, I left the cinema oddly unmoved by this final entry in the Daniel Craig era, and while I can't put my finger on it, I just know that it isn't right. There's a good chance, I think, that Fukunaga may be asked back for the reboot. I really hope so, I really do. But I also hope that if he is asked back, they let him do his own thing.
Yes, not for the first time in this episode, I feel like you've largely been reading my mind. This time it's you and not Scott.
Sorry about that.
First of all, I was worried about this film for quite a while when I saw the running time. What business
you and I both.
What business does a Bond film have being nearly 3 hours? Well, the answer to that is obviously none. But for all of that, I didn't really notice the time. So presumably I also was enjoying it, and I did enjoy the film. And I, for some reason, because I'm weird and stupid like this, I watched Spectre again before seeing this. Partly just to confirm that, yes, it did steal part of its plot from Austin Powers and Goldmember. And when I went back to watch that, I realised I had forgotten that Spectre's 2.5 hours long nearly. So it's not the first time they've done this.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your flow, Drew, but I do also offer you and Scott an apology, because having revisited it last year at some point, I can't remember when, whatever, I do realise now that Spectre is absolute.
Yep. Yeah, I found it somewhat less in this rewatch, but because I didn't expect anything, I knew it was coming. So,
no new has come to light.
I was more just bored by it, whereas Spectre is offensively stupid and tremendously boring, and one or either of those can be overcome by other things in the films, but both of them together, no.
Yeah, the one thing a Bond film should not be is boring. That I can deal with it being poorly paced, I can deal with it being overlong, I can deal with it being stupidly plotted, but I will not accept it being boring. And actually, you guys were right and I was wrong. It is on record there. There you go. Spectre is pretty boring, and that equals bad.
And I wonder it's because of like the message left us that you're talking about what the director had to work with here. It's nothing like as bad, fortunately. I liked The Last Jedi, but it feels a bit like, in some way, sort of undoing stuff that was done in the film before, the way that Rise of Skywalker did with The Last Jedi. Although sort of the other way around, I guess, in terms of quality. But having watched this film has done the quite incredible trick of making Spectre worse. And it really has been things like, after all that stupid retconning in Spectre, all these villains, that was me. Get bent. And then completely wasting the awesome Christoph Waltz on a really terrible implementation of Blofeld. But they set up Spectre, this incredible organization with tentacles everywhere, the greatest threat the world has ever seen. Then a few minutes into No Time to Die, nah, Spectre's no biggie, bye-bye. And what should be like the ultimate villain just gone.
That's the thing. They press the reset button on Spectre, and that's a pretty bold move, actually. And you think, that's interesting. Jesus, this is going to be something else. And then he's a total non-entity.
Yeah. So they take this, like Spectre and Blofeld, make them completely meaningless. Like, you undercut your 3 films before that by suggesting they're somehow connected to this, and then no, nothing, none of it matters. Yeah, then they replace him by this terrible villain who has no charisma at all, and that's when you can even hear a word he's saying, because Rami Malek decided to mumble his entire performance for some reason. And then it's the same sort of boring world-ending plot that's never interesting, because you never know exactly how it's going to end. But what is this plot? He's going to kill some unidentified group of people. Why? Enormous shrug.
Was there an explanation of specifically who he's targeting and why? Because I feel like I only saw it on Saturday morning. I finally got a chance to see it on my own on Saturday morning, and I don't remember. Obviously, he wipes out Spectre, right? I understand why he would want to do that, but who was he targeting after that? Why was
I think the closest you get to it is that bit where Bond is talking to M, and it's just saying, the usual power, world domination, that sort of thing. It has never gone to in any depth, and that's, I don't know if that makes it better or worse. I had to go and check what I said about Spectre because I've forgotten it and hadn't seen it since the cinema back in the day. But I think my primary criticism was that it was trying to kind of bridge the kind of more grounded Bond with the world domination, spectre-y, classic era Bond kind of plots, and not doing a particularly great job of it. And while I was watching No Time to Die, I felt this was doing that same trick a bit better by being a bit more mysterious. But I think by the time you get to the end, and certainly by the time, I only saw it yesterday, but I was thinking about it today, and again, it's one of these films that the more you think about it, the further it falls apart.
The less it works,
It just realised that it was trying to be a mystery, but ultimately it didn't actually have any answers to that mystery. It is very much the plan's very much that, step one, step one, steal underpants. Step two, question marks. Step three, profit.
I think they were very, very careful, actually, to specifically not target anyone. You have the scientist when he's talking to Nome at one point saying, people of West African origin, I could theoretically engineer that to wipe them out. I think they were very, very careful to not put any specific threat in there. Just like, it's just random people. But it doesn't work as a threat.
No.
So just that bothered me. And so you've got this charisma-free villain mumbling his way through a plot that nobody cares about. But I mean, it's annoying because there were bits I liked too. I mean, I didn't, as much as it's a beautiful piece of music, I didn't care to be reminded of On Her Majesty's Secret Service because, I've seen it.
Yes, well, but we'll agree to disagree on that. I don't mind that film at all.
I don't mind it, but it's not good. It has the second worst Bond. I mean, there's all these films with Daniel Craig have had like reference to other films. I appreciated seeing the Aston Martin for The Living Daylights, which was half of a good film and an interesting Aston Martin.
There's a lot of callbacks and fan service and trying to wrap things up, and it's all very knowing in that sense. And I mean, like, I'll put this on the table. Like, I would recommend to anyone with even the slightest interest in Bond should definitely watch this. You'll watch this in the cinema and you will enjoy it. And
I thought,
probably just don't try not to think about it that much when you leave the cinema. Just go, that was fun, and then leave it. It's probably the best one.
We're doing spoilers though, right?
Yes.
Right.
End of the episode. Like, from this point on, consider spoilers.
Yeah. So I grew up absolutely loving the sort of the classic Bond movies, and the first Bond movie I saw at the cinema was... What's that?
I think we all did.
Yeah, we probably all did. And then the first Bond movie I actually saw in the cinema was Goldfinger, which was the first big sort of reinvention of Bond, which it turns out now in retrospect wasn't that much of... Yeah. What's that?
Do you mean GoldenEye?
What did I say?
Goldfinger.
Oh, Jesus Christ. No, I'm not that old. Sorry, GoldenEye.
Show your age a bit there, Trey.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Goldfinger, the first big reinvention. GoldenEye, the first big reinvention with Brosnan, which in hindsight obviously isn't that big of a reinvention actually, because most of Brosnan's films weren't that far adrift of your man Roger Moore and his outings. So I think at the point at which I matured and became an adult, it was just about the right time for me to be thinking, yeah, those were a bit silly and misogynistic and trashy, really, aren't they? And I can still enjoy them for that. And I still care a great deal about them. But I think age-wise, we're probably very well positioned to appreciate the sort of reimagining of the character with Daniel Craig, which has been a sort of really fine balancing act between acknowledging some of the shortcomings of Bond, both in literature and the movies of old, and a much more contemporary style of filmmaking, which was sorely lacking by the, or maybe actually like really misdirected by the end of the Brosnan era. Yeah. But for the worst entries, I know you guys know that, I find certain things to like about Quantum of Solace. I don't think it's as bad a film as would be generally perceived.
I think given its circumstances of creation, it's kind of amazing.
It's kind of amazing, the fact that it's actually a film, right?
It's essentially improvised.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just Casino Royale 1.5 from it, and it's not bad.
We spent $150 million on an improv piece, basically, and it turned out not to be an incoherent mess. Fair enough. People seem to bitch about the fact that the plot revolves around water, as though any MacGuffin in any Bond film has ever had any consequence, or
the plot.
This is one of the more realistic ones.
Exactly. The plot of Quantum of Solace is one of the most realistic ones there is at the moment.
Yes.
I think. Apart from Casino Royale, because of like the money, maybe not interesting, but believable because Casino Royale was small stakes. It was playing financial markets and stuff.
Yeah.
That was,
In 50 years' time or 100 years' time, I can imagine there might be a war over some sort of diamond-powered space laser. But do you know what I can imagine a war taking place over tomorrow? The scarcity of natural resources.
Yes, particularly water. And it also is already happening.
Yeah,
Bolivia and stuff where water has become privatized and not available to the masses of the population. It actually is
absolutely.
happening. Entirely legitimate plot.
Absolutely. But as tourists, we can all pay to go and see the beautiful salt flats or dry lakes, as the rest of the world might refer to them. So I know I feel like I've got a huge emotional investment in Bond. I feel like I've kind of grown up with James Bond. I don't know how you guys feel, if you feel the same way about it or not. I don't know, but I just think it's a remarkable feat to get to this point where we have a movie which is tooled to develop Bond the most he's ever been developed in a film, to make him a father of a young daughter. And you guys know how I feel about my perspective changing, how every film now suddenly I realise that every film seems to be about a father-daughter relationship, and at the slightest hint I will just start to well up. I think it's absolutely remarkable to take that as a plot device and here, like, double spoiler alert, skip forward 5 minutes if you don't want to know what happens, to then kill James Bond, and for me to walk out of the cinema. Well, to kill James Bond as he's on the radio talking to his love, discussing his daughter, and then for me to walk out of the cinema 5 minutes later and go, and not to really have felt one way or the other about it. I still haven't parsed my thoughts about this properly, and I still don't know that I can have any kind of cogent discussion about it. I just know that something's wrong there.
I was just going to, I did feel something at the end, but I wonder if that plays differently for people who really know the Daniel Craig Bond, whereas I've known, 6 Bonds, 7 Bonds?
Yeah.
I've lost track now, depending on quite how you count it, having seen the entire series and been watching them since I was a kid. So it's like, yeah, they're trying to do this, but this kind of an interchangeable characters, it's going to be played by another actor in the future and has been played by several in the past, and I mean, at least they didn't do what the start of On Her Majesty's Secret Service did there, breaking the fourth wall, but it's like, yeah.
That's one of my favourite moments in the entire franchise.
I know, and I hate it with a passion. But yeah, it's like whether, like, I mean, if you really only know the Daniel Craig ones, whether you might feel like quite differently about it.
Yeah.
Because if you know all the other Bond stuff, it's kind of an interchangeable character. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, when Craig snuffs it in this one, Daniel Craig, not yourself, obviously.
Thank God for that.
I mainly felt about it the same way I would have felt if a Marvel character dies. It's like, well, they'll probably bring him back.
Yeah.
Or some version of him will come back. Yeah. It doesn't have the same kind of emotional resonance. Like you say, if it had been something, if Bond only existed in the Daniel Craig continuity and there hadn't been all the rest of it and we hadn't seen umpteen different people playing Bonds, then, it might have felt differently. As it was, it just sort of stands, when it happens, it's just more of a, oh, well, that's an interesting way to set up the next lot of Bond films, isn't it? And it kind of, there's something about the kind of meta-ness of it that kind of dissolves some of the emotional impact. I don't know if that's just because it was that last section does go on a little bit too long. It does, for me, it does drag a little bit too much. That's the only criticism I really have of it as a Bond film. I thought most of the rest of it I really enjoyed. Some great action bits. Love some of these new characters as well. I thought most of it all did pretty well. I like the way that M kind of falls apart over the part of it as well. Lots of really nice bits in it, but that section at the end in the volcano base, missile silo base, it just goes on just that bit too long and kind of repeats itself a bit, and there's a bit too much of just running back and forward down the same corridors. It feels like one of those levels in Halo where you're going through the library. So it's just all great corridors for a while. It's a bit too much, and that by the end of it was like, okay, I'm ready for this to end now. And then it ended, and it was like, okay, thank you for that, and I was ready to go. And it really undercut some of the emotional heft that it might have had if it had just been a bit tighter in that last act.
Yeah, even Bond's disinterested. He's walking down these shadowy corridors. characters, and he's in the middle of a phone conversation, and he pauses briefly every 5 seconds to shoot another sort of like anonymous goon in the shadows in the head, like absolutely without even having to bother aiming. It's just like, oh God, sorry, 2 seconds, bang, bang. Right, sorry, what were you saying? Even he's disinterested by that point. Just cut that 5 minutes out.
Yeah. Also, Scott, you were saying about the Marvel thing, and that's just in general. Just I feel the same way, but and also in general with the infection of their post-credit scene, I had to stay to the end of this film to check that they didn't have a scene right at the end where he somehow miraculously got out of the explosion, because I would not have been surprised. I've been pissed off, obviously, but I did not be surprised. But unfortunately, as I got to the end of it, the thing that I think every single James Bond film has had, certainly most of them, it did say at the end, final scene, or final letters on this screen, James Bond will return. So I was hoping they hadn't changed that, but also then at the same point, it's like, yes, it doesn't really count.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say, Drew. So I went into this, I didn't wait to see if there was a post-credits scene, because I think I knew there wasn't. I had read an article which claimed to be spoiler-free, but the article basically ended with, but don't worry, it does say at the end, James Bond will return. Brilliant. Well, that's not spoiler free then, is it? Because I've got at least 2 brain cells to rub together. So I'm guessing then that James Bond dies at the end of this. So I went in expecting it, and I had made up my mind beforehand that I felt that that's what needed to happen, and I had a really definite picture in my head of how I would have liked it to play out. I just don't think I was expecting it to be this.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like James Bond will return would mean he's dead, because that's it. It's in every film. Very often associated with the name of the next one because they'd planned that far in advance.
Yeah, exactly.
I was more just checking for like they were keeping that and hadn't broken that tradition. But yeah, the ending's a bit underwhelming, and maybe for the reasons we've talked about. And it's like, okay, he dies saving the world, but that's not what he always does. I'd like something maybe a bit more personal, because all that kind of world scale stuff just leaves me cold. And it always has done.
They try and mix and match that, because ultimately that's kind of the reason why he doesn't make much of an effort to really escape, even admittedly. It doesn't quite work that way. It's like they tried to add their cake and eat it on that one. That's the reason he couldn't return to humanity, is because of the whole virus thing and nanobots and how it would spread to his family, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, and eventually get to his girlfriend and his daughter. Yeah,
so that's kind of how they were trying to get it a bit more personal, at the same time as being not in no way personal at all, because he's on an island far, far away from them. So it doesn't quite work. Again, it seems like one of these things where the writers have had a couple of different ideas and sort of just thrown them together, and it's not exactly stuck together, but it's more or less just hanging off each other enough. It doesn't quite work, which is a bit of a shame.
Do you know what I think it might be is throughout this arc of these 5 Daniel Craig movies, I kind of feel like, I know I've read a few articles about the sort of development of his character and the sort of acknowledgement of modern mores and whatnot. And yeah, he is a sort of, I think one of the reasons that we probably appreciate Daniel Craig, and I think most people who are sane would probably agree, he's the best James Bond. I know we probably ought to say Sean Connery out of some sort of misplaced notion of national sentiment, right? But let's be honest about it objectively. In terms of being a movie star and bringing a character to screen, Daniel Craig has been and will be remembered as the best Bond, probably for some time to come, because that character is inherently shallow to begin with, so I don't know how you could possibly portray him that much better than Daniel Craig has anyway. But I do feel that there's an element of dishonesty around character development, because throughout these films he has remained a remorseless killer and relatively emotionless, apart from his fixation with Vesper, to the point where this film begins with him and his new partner, who ought to be the love of his life, but basically starts with a conversation between them being, hey, listen, do you want to go and visit Vesper's grave? Because you never shut up about Vesper, and I really think you need to shut up about Vesper. So shall we try and draw a line under this? That's about as developed as his character has been, and I kind of wish there had been a much more even arc throughout these 5 movies of his development towards being a human as opposed to a murderous automaton, because you kind of get to the end of this movie and it's 2 3/4 hours, and in the last 5 minutes it's well, I'm a dad now, so I ought to care, so I'm going to make the ultimate sacrifice. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. That's an awfully steep curve on the graph of emotion against time there. That's an exponential curve all of a sudden. I would have liked to have seen that character in retrospect, I must say. I would like to have seen that character development play out a little bit more across the 5 movies, but it does feel like killing machine, killing machine, killing machine, killing machine, dad, ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah, and also, like, especially when you think, oh, what about all the other people he killed? Didn't they possibly have children?
You know, Drew,
like,
yes, nobody thinks of the henchman.
yes, exactly. like Austin Powers really had that spot on. Like, oh, the henchman dying. I was like, oh, he's just a henchman. He's in the henchman's union. It's he just goes to work like everybody else. And the number of like faceless henchmen that got dispatched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For all that, though, I still enjoyed it. And like you're saying, Scotty, about very much like you recommend going to see it. I left the cinema and wanted to go and see it again.
Yeah.
For all the issues I had, I was ready to go and see it again the next, well, maybe not the same day, but the next day I'd have gone, and I probably will go and see it while it's still in the cinemas again. And it's more just a frustration for me in general, this film, because there's so many things that are bothering me. Like how does MI6 have the resources to create Heracles? Why is there a giant poison farm? Why giant poison farm? Why?
Why do you make nanobots by having like what appears to be a canal that you stir?
With randomly scattered fluorescent tubes.
How does that help? And then Safin apparently rescues Madeline by firing an assault rifle haphazardly through the ice. Weird rescue, but then I'm thinking, don't think about it. I can't not do that, and I really don't want to not think about stuff. But I was fighting it. And that was the most frustrating thing. It's like, you've done so much else right, film. Be better.
I don't know. Sorry, Drew.
Just because back to the thing, start thinking, well, it's quite good to set up in one of the opening scenes that Bond was bomb-proof, since he had to be grenade-proof later on. Explosions don't work like that, but okay. You've just had a bomb in your face, so you could run it off in a couple of minutes, and that's handy.
I don't know what they're going to do moving forward. I mean, one can only assume a reboot, but now Amazon are involved. What I suspect will happen is...
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. I think haven't Amazon sort of bought some sort of shared rights to Bond now?
Oh, I missed that. Okay.
I'm pretty sure they have. So I think what's probably going to happen...
Did they buy MGM or something like that?
Something like that.
So I'm somewhat familiar now, actually.
Yeah. So I suspect what's going to happen is like 4 to 5 years of Amazon using Bond as a Marvel analog, basically, to sort of combat Disney Plus, and we'll have all sorts of spin-offs on, like every minor character you can imagine. You'll have like you'll have a cooking show with Q, right? I feel like that's what this film was setting up. Q likes to cook. Brilliant. So we'll probably have some sort of series around Q cooking, right?
And they set up in that film that Q's gay, because he talks about him coming round for their date. And that's it.
Yeah.
They'll do sort of a feint towards inclusiveness by making a minor character gay, but they couldn't do it with Bond, and they won't do it with Bond, just like Disney.
And do you know what's frustrating about that? There was that scene where Bond was tied up in the chair in Skyfall.
Bardem.
Yep. That was getting really weirdly sexual, and I thought something amazing was going to happen there, and then it was never referenced again. And that is probably the single most interesting thing, where I think Bond, he makes some throwaway comment about, you assume. I can't remember. There's some basically innuendo.
First time, I think, something like that.
Yes, right, exactly, right. And I thought, we're going to go somewhere interesting here. Never mentioned again, right?
Because this thing, you could just make Bond pansexual, and it's actually quite interesting too, because in terms of like doing his job, it might be that he just like needs to, like, let's disregard the fact he's actually the world's worst secret agent, because apparently the world has always known his name. But like, to do his job, because like he may have to sleep with lots of people, so like just make him say he just doesn't care.
He's the most amoral, remorseless asshole on the planet. It doesn't matter to him whether he's sleeping with a woman or a guy. Exactly. Yep. So they could have done something really interesting there. But I suspect we'll get 4 to 5 years of every minor character you can imagine, and like young Bond or something like that. You'll probably have like, oh, here's a series about James Bond and his naval career, etc.
We'll get a cartoon about his young nephew.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You'll get everything. You'll probably have a spin-off series about Bond's postman, probably thinking every week it's like a different letter gets delivered to Bond's house and the postman imagining what might be in this amazing hyper-secret letter, right? You'll have all
and
that.
Young Bond's going to be his daughter. That's what they'll do.
Yes, well, of course it is. But I suspect we'll get 4 to 5 years of that, and then when everybody's forgotten what was actually happening, they'll just reboot again and they'll just do another origin story. I expect that is probably what will happen. But what I do hope happens, because obviously, Barbara Broccoli and what's his name? It completely escapes me now.
Oh, the guy with the moustache, half brother, Michael
Wilson.
Michael G. Wilson.
Michael G. Wilson. They've got a history of sort of like finding a director and sticking with them. They like to stick with them. And Kerry Yoji Fukunaga, when 3 years ago or whatever it was, when I first heard that he was on board, I'm like, oh, right, okay. There's a certain baseline of quality that I'm pretty sure this is going to deliver. He's working with other people's material. What I would love to see is them do a Martin Campbell and bring him back for the start of the next cycle, but allow him to develop it from the start and just see what a Kerry Yoji Fukunaga pure Bond film looks like from the start. And I think that might be something really interesting. And that's really what I hope happens. I cannot tell you how much that's what I will put up with avoiding Amazon spin-off for 5 years if I get that film, because I can almost guarantee you that's probably going to be the best Bond film of all time. I just really hope it happens. I really hope it happens.
So we just don't have another case of like being lumbered with a hack like Guy Hamilton or something. Like,
Sion Sono. Sion Sono, Nicolas Cage's Bond. Does that wrap that up?
I think it does. We could probably talk about Bond for hours, but I think that's all we do need to say.
We could, and we have, and we probably will again in future.
Yes. We do have an entire episode on all of the other Bond films if you want to listen to that.
Yes. And of course, some Bond knockoffs as well.
Yes. I kind of want to go back and do individual episodes per film now, in retrospect, now that we have seen the closure of, quite conclusively, the closure of the Daniel Craig era. I don't know if you guys will be on board for that, but I kind of want to revisit every previous Bond film in the context of what we know now.
I would be up for that, but as long as we also cover Operation Kid Brother again, because that's amazing.
Because that's amazing. And I still have such a crush on that actress whose name I can't remember, who's got the gap in her front teeth. Oh, she was cute.